All right. Next up, we have Karla Monterroso of Code 2040. Oh yeah, I got some fans in the house. Michael Essien, he's the principal at Martin Luther King Jr. Academic Middle School. Brandon Nicholson of the Hidden Genius Project. And your moderator, TechCrunch reporter, Haya Camps. And they're going to talk about code and underrepresented youth.
Yeah, OK. We'll go this way. That's fine. We'll do it this way. Right. Thank you so much for coming. I have a really interesting panel here talking about why code matters to underrepresented youth and figuring out how that actually is a funnel from the schools right into the workplace. As I was talking to you guys before, several of you were interested in talking about not just resolving a skills gap, but talking more specifically about an opportunity gap. Where does an opportunity gap come from?
Go for it.
So when the population I serve is in the southeast section of San Francisco, 89% of my students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So their parents, in their lives, they don't have the exposure that kids need to have to participate in STEM careers or just have an understanding of basic code and intricacies around using science technology. And so when they come to our school, if the teachers don't have that, then we literally have kids at our school site who aren't given the opportunity to compete with other children. And so when you see those test scores are a reflection of what kids have not been exposed to, the opportunity that they've lost, that other kids in other sections of the city are being exposed to. So that's where the opportunity gap comes from.
And you guys are all trying to help starting to address how that works. Michael, you're doing a big part of that as well. And how do you start? How do you start to look into that?
In order for kids to be exposed to things, the individuals who are responsible for providing them learning opportunities, you have to build their capacity. If the teachers don't have the capacity to create the rich experiences so students can begin to wrestle with ideas, then that opportunity can't be maximized. So as a site administrator, it's my job, how do I actually find the resources, the individuals in the community to come to the school site to build the capacity of my teachers so that in every classroom, kids are getting exposed to these opportunities.
Can I say something about that too? So the median net worth of a white family in the United States is $132,000, right? So if I lined everyone up, the middle of the number line is $132,000. In the Latinx community, that is $12,000. In the Black community, that is $9,000. So even if I'm high income, high middle income, Black or Latinx, the things that I have exposure to look very different than my white counterparts. You know, within the Asian American community, the median net worth is $113,000. So it looks really different. And the opportunity gap and part of what we're talking about, I think there is a huge responsibility there if we want to create the workforce that we want to create, to find many more structural fixes. And like the guys and I were just talking backstage, and like one of the things that's so crazy is, you know, if like my university will go out and scout from middle school a college athlete, like why aren't the bigger, more resource companies doing the same kind of service to bring talent out within the communities and connect and be a community builder and an access maker? Because the other thing we know is that 80% of all jobs are gotten through friends and family.
Yeah, for sure.
That's an important thing for us as well. I mean, when we think about how we reach young people in this space, we reach them where they are. And so when we think about opportunity gaps, when we speak with our young people, it's really about missed opportunities, frankly, from the Valley and from the sector. And by that, we just mean that young people are brilliant, the young people in our communities are brilliant, and they produce things that we see in the technology space all the time. Sometimes those are things that they built, sometimes it's content, right? And if you're on social media, sometime today, one of the memes that you like probably would have come from the community that we serve. The fact that on fleek. It's probably going to make its way into the dictionary, the Merriam-Webster dictionary at some point, and Peaches Monroe probably won't have been compensated for that, but people who work for companies represented in this room in marketing communications probably will be. That's a big deal to us. So we don't look at it from an asset or a deficit-based perspective. We say, listen, people are already looking to you right now, and why just have to keep relying on people to build the tool for you to now demonstrate your brilliance? Again, why not just build it yourself? Because everything you're doing already very much represents ingenuity, and technology, right, goes back to the beginning of time. You know, opposable thumbs are one of our first important technologies, so it means we've been digging into technology and engineering as communities and people of color, particularly Black communities, for several generations, and so this isn't new to us. We just need opportunities to be able to leverage what we know and I think be more entrepreneurial about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for a company like Google or Facebook, a top inventive engineer is way more valuable than a good football player is to university. So to your point, it makes perfect sense to actually send out some scouts, and that they don't boggles my mind. I was talking to you guys earlier, and actually one of the topics that came up was the topic of the panel. I mean, we're talking about underrepresented youth and why code matters. But it's a kind of, we could talk about it the other way around. I mean, what can underrepresented youth specifically contribute to problem-solving skills and different ways from different contexts of thinking of, you know, resolving some really big challenges within organizations? Do you want to?
Yeah, one of our programs at Code 2040 is our Fellows Program. And so this summer alone, we will have 135 students at 40 different tech companies across, right? Which begs the question, right? If we, over the course of a year, can collect a 1,300-person funnel and 130 different people that are going to work at a tech company, why is a tech company unable to do that, right? And we watch every summer them contribute to products that are being pushed live, right? Like the threading that you see in Slack, a Code 2040 fellow was a part of that, right? Like a lot of things that are happening at Medium, a Code 2040 fellow was a part of that. And we do every summer a hack for diversity, and our students will come up with products that are going to help the demographic shift that's happening. Part of how Code 2040 gets its name is that 2040 is the beginning of the decade where there will be more Black and Latinx folks than anything else in the country. And the products that they're creating are innovative, right? Like it's everything from a AR version of LinkedIn that allows you to lower your unconscious bias because you see the people walking down the street and can understand that they're engineers, to like, how do you analyze your algorithms for the diversity of your code, right? Like, those are the kinds of ideas that are like getting produced by our students, and we are by far and large not seeing those things actually show up in the sector.
Yeah. And I think when we start talking about problem solving is just a way of thinking. So the problems that exist now, they won't exist 20 years from now. So when we start talking about how do you prepare people to be ready for the sector, like how do we create a way of thinking that is around critical thinking and becoming problem solvers? So this is where coding actually comes in. When you actually have students, some of the challenges that we have, like they have this situation. I need to move this object here, and it needs to move over X number of feet over a specified amount of time. You have to come up with the code. So now kids have to then begin to figure out ways. And the more children have to figure out ways to solve problems, they actually develop patterns. Like there are ways, like, okay, we need to actually think this thing out. What are some of the initial designs? Will this work? And then we need to hold conversations around whether we have the resources and the materials. When kids practice this, over time, that way of thinking becomes generalized, and it's just how you go into solving problems altogether. The challenge that we have right now is many of our children, Latinx and African American children, they are critical thinkers, but they're not exposed to problem solving in this manner. And that has to be done. And when that happens and their thinking changes, because everybody is a problem solver, they will figure it out. Those kids will then become ready, eligible, and you can actually have places like Google and Facebook spending more time recruiting them, right? Because now we're giving them the time, just like the kids we look at for sports. they're taller, faster, but then they get skills taught to them. They don't say, just because somebody's taller and faster, we're going to give you a scholarship. They actually spend time training them, doing specific things. That has to happen with our children, especially around code.
I think, though, it's important also that we just recognize that if, necessity is the mother of innovation, then, the young people we're working with have innovations like a mother, because they got plenty of needs. And you see what informs the brilliance of a Steph Curry, for example, or even some of the more creative athletes. We see it every day in our young people and the ideas they generate when they finally build, So, if you look at our video on our website, you see two of our young men from our cohort last summer. One built a project that was all about helping formerly incarcerated individuals who come home find jobs that are tailored to them, or find hiring managers who are willing to hire them, right, and make that super accessible. And then the other one you see in the video is a young man who wants to make sure that people who don't have access to medical insurance can crowdfund specifically for the procedures they need, right? That comes from their experience, not from them being better than anybody or worse. They just have things going on. So sometimes they're not going to be playing catch up. I grew up in Oakland, but I went to high school in Marin, and there are some things that young people in Marin won't be able to do, right? Meaning there's a gap for them. They'll be playing catch up to our young people. So that's what we reinforce for them. You're not always playing catch up or bridging the gap. You're actually just different, and you bring assets and skills that, once you look up, if you do get that access to opportunity, people will be actually impressed and benefiting from your innovations because of the obstacles you had to overcome to get there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the big kind of mantras in entrepreneurship is scratch your own itch. But if you have a whole group of people who've never experienced certain challenges, you're never going to get that resolved.
And it changes your company at a fundamental level. Like, we had an alumni at one of our partner companies, and she was like, "Hey, what's the temp to perm strategy for the Code 2040 fellows?" And no one had thought about that at all. She was like, "Well, I know that the other interns here, the other interns who had been here had a temp to perm strategy. Why don't you?" And she's like, "I'll be back in a week. I want the answer." And she comes back. Like, out of that, fellows were hired full time at the company because someone was thinking about temp to perm strategy. And now that's not it's not malicious, right? No one there was like, "Oh, we're not going to create a temp to perm strategy because we think that, like, the Code 2040 fellows can't hack it." Like, no one thought that, but it didn't occur to anyone that it is just as meriting the same kind of talent pipeline work that everything else had, right? And it took one of our alums, like, pointing out the issue, and now that structure is going to help a lot more students transition and do a conversion into full-time employment for that company.
Well, absolutely. One of the really painful things that keeps happening is that it seems as if a lot of Silicon Valley is heavily predicated on doing employee referrals. And of course, if you have a room full of white dudes, they know mostly white dudes, and you get more white dudes. How do you break out of that pattern?
For me, I think the most important thing, it just starts with great data, and particularly when you have billion-dollar companies that pride themselves on data, and they sell a lot of books and get a lot of money to speak because of all the work they do with one, data, and two, flat structures. I think, if anybody wants to say it with me, feel free. Asia is a big-ass continent. If you want to say it with me again, feel free. Asia is a big-ass continent. So when you look at the employment practices for many companies, they don't disaggregate data for Asian Pacific Islander groups. If you're in Oakland and you go to Oakland High, they speak roughly 30 languages at Oakland High alone, Oakland High School. And half of those languages are probably API related. You've got Hmong, Cambodian, Samoan, Tongan, so on and so forth, right? And so all those groups happen to be underrepresented. There are tons of Filipinos in the state. I could bet $1 million for 10 EVPs at billion-dollar companies and come away $10 million richer, right? If I ask them, how many Filipinos do you have in your company? So how do you know that you're representing the Bay Area, California, Oakland, if you don't even have good data and you brag about being a data company? Oakland Unified School District, look at their annual report every year. For all the hell they catch for the things they don't necessarily do right, they've got great data on their students. And so companies could definitely learn from them. And I think when you look at referrals and the like, you can get a better picture for what you have or don't have.
And I think from a school district perspective, so at my middle school, we created what is called a STEAM night. And so we have things that our students actually produce They have to produce things. In one class, it was a combo class, they actually dealt with gender-specific marketing. And their task was to come up with something that was gender neutral, and they had to sell the item. We didn't tell them what the item was. They can generate anything they want, put them in teams of 4. And it was amazing what they came up with. But the presentation was Shark Tank style. They had to present. So then how do we get those companies to be the individuals that are actually on the judging panel so they can determine which products actually win? But what happens is you're being exposed to the creativity and the thinking of the individuals in that community. So then, you know, white people know white people. Now you're actually white people at schools, and they see these black and brown people who are actually thinking and doing things, and it actually expands their awareness. Because in the end, we're about changing awareness, right? Because when you're more aware, you can make better decisions, which is data, right? Data and awareness. But also, it's not just data. You need to experience. You need to see black and brown people being creative. And we have that, and then how do we expose that to these companies?
It's important to know that 40% of all Black and Latinx teens are interested in a job in the Bay Area, or in the tech industry. And like, often this is like, oh, they're not interested enough, they're interested in something else, right? But the interest is there. And then you get to the collegiate level, and 18% of all computer science graduates are Black and Latinx, right? 18%. Less than half of them get jobs coming out of college. So I want you to imagine being a kid from one of our communities, getting yourself into high amounts of debt through your college education and not getting the thing that you were told you could get when you go in, right? And this happens, and like, by the way, we're talking about underrepresented folks, and I think sometimes we talk about that from an income level, but this is Black and Latinx people at all income levels, right? And so there is a fundamental problem that you are creating if the pipeline you do have, you're not letting half of it in the door, right? And we have really seen like the systemic problems that happen within the interview process within the tech companies, where like, you know, someone will come back to us and be like, oh, it was like an algorithm or data structure problem. Like, I mean, I'm sure that there are engineers in the room, like that is a crappy response. Like, what is it? That they don't know how to do hashes, arrays? Like, is it, like, what is the thing that they are missing? What is the competency? And often what we find is the competency that people are looking for is Stanford, right? And, and that is not a competency, right? And you are taking out the ability to get, like, we have students coming in this summer from over 60 universities, right? 60 different universities where talent is in. But the only reason we can get them in there is because we have access points to a lot of people, and that access is and creating that community is pivotal in this.
That's awesome. I think we have a couple of audience questions as well, maybe, possibly?
Yes, we
Yay!
do. Just as my iPad's reloading. The first is that funding for public schools is so dire that prominent tech companies step in to fund K-12 education. How does this not lead to the privatization of our education systems?
I think that is an issue that resides in government. I know California, with the amount of money that we have in the state of California, the fact that we spend less on our students than, say, the state of Arkansas is criminal. So I think the things that we prioritize is producing a thing where corporate can then take over public education. It's just a matter of shifting our priorities.
Listen, y'all, housing segregation is everything, right? So this matters when you have students who will not go to a school because there are Black and brown children in it, right? And because you're pulling out your students and putting them in a private school because having them in a diverse community feels threatening, right? We are segregated. Like, what we're talking about is the segregation of the tech industry and the reintegration that needs to happen.
And certainly, you know, it's worth noting, I think that might be me, sorry, that, as you mentioned, Michael, what we spend on education actually is eclipsed by what we spend on the criminal justice system, including the juvenile justice system in our state. And, you know, obviously those resources can be redistributed. But what I would say to just philanthropic investment in education is I actually am an advocate, as someone who's got a background in education policy, for billionaire investors to actually test those models in the schools where their children go, right? Because we've made our communities laboratories, right? But if it's not good enough for your kids or for the kids, you know, for the children of your neighbors, and it's not good enough for our young people, we don't need it. So if it works there and you're happy with it, then I'm willing to try it on. But if you're not, then that's a non-starter for me.
And I just want to real quick, I do know that we have one of our partners, Benioff, Salesforce, and he is not trying to control things. He's actually given the Principals Innovation Fund. I have $100,000 and I can do anything I want with that money. He's not telling me you need to spend it this way or that way. I can be as creative as I want. Those types of partnerships are phenomenal.
Can you repeat the name of it? Because some of us might have been able to hear it, but your mic went out.
We partner with Salesforce Benioff, and he has a donation to each middle school, $100,000 per principal. It's called the Principals Innovation Fund, and we get to do whatever it is we so desire with that fund. We love those type of partnerships.
Ashe.
Awesome. Well, we're out of time, guys. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
thank you.